Good afternoon, everyone. This is Andrew. Some people call me Sunfrog. I'm broadcasting from my home at an undisclosed location in Tennessee. And the title of this long piece is called Confessions After Listening to the Conspirituality Podcast. Confessions After Listening to the Conspirituality Podcast by Andrew Sunfrog. According to their own description, what is the Conspirituality Podcast? A weekly study of converging right-wing conspiracy theories and faux progressive wellness utopianism. At best, the conspirituality movement attacks public health efforts in times of crisis. At worst, it fronts and recruits for the fever dream of QAnon. As the alt-right and New Age horseshoe toward each other in a blur of disinformation, clear discourse and good intentions get smothered. Charismatic influencers exploit their followers by co-opting conspiracy theories on a spectrum of intensity ranging from vaccines to child trafficking. In the process, spiritual beliefs that have nurtured creativity and meaning are transformed into memes of quickly globalizing paranoia. Conspirituality Podcast attempts to bring understanding to this landscape. A journalist, a cult researcher, and a philosophical skeptic discuss the stories, cognitive dissonances, and cultic dynamics tearing through the yoga, wellness, and new spirituality worlds. Mainstream outlets have noticed the problem. We crowdsource, research, analyze, and dream answers to it. So this is my confession after listening to that, to the Conspirituality Podcast. Preface. The following attempt at an epic poem comes in response to the mentally shattering experiences I had while listening to the Conspirituality Podcast, which I just explained. Though I am now several episodes into my reacquaintance with this excellent podcast, which first happened after 1/6/21, the shaking shock that prompted this occurred with episode number 86, titled Charles Eisenstein, New Age Q. This call out and takedown on Charles Eisenstein was so needed and done with such clarity and compassion. Eisenstein seems to have some ideas adjacent to thought that I had previously found helpful, such as Zerzan, Salins, Daniel Quinn, Graeber, etc. But it is actually something else entirely. Heck, we all like good origin stories. Just as I've seen Russell Brand completely derailed in the last couple of years, as the podcast shows, Eisenstein has fallen into the Q-friendly anti-vax bromance of the too white influencer world. Friends, just because we sometimes feel the grumbles of spirit deep within, just because our intuition sometimes feels like a direct line to the divine, let's always be willing to take a deep breath, to take a step back, to vet our visions with fellow travelers of good conscience. There is no magic pill. Now, as I write, or as I was writing this, I was listening to podcaster Matthew Remski deconstruct a white slam poet, and I felt a little too seen, perhaps even a little shamed. But I want to confess this before I confess more. I've been writing poetry, stuff like that, for 30 years. But I certainly don't share the Instagram influencer, well-funded self-help vibe of the person in that Remski exposes. Since we are all vulnerable, broken, in need of sustenance at this interval of pandemic fatigue and social unrest, I certainly understand the underlying cravings that prompt people to seek these curated, quote, peak experiences, pricey they might be. Why not let them do their thing, like you with your books, your records, and your unquenchable live music habit? Beneath it all, I see something vapid and probably worse. The platforming of people who appear to expect their spiritual bypassing to protect them from COVID. The insidious intersection of this drift from the apparently harmless hobbies of the hot, rich professionals to something sickening and harmful in its oblivious proximity to the far-right conspiracy crowd. I know I need to develop and maintain a personal spiritual practice, communal connections with friends and comrades, and a direct tap to whatever source offers compassion, engaged activism, but also detachment, radical empathy, and unconditional love. It's been more than 18 months since I left a job as a rural Presbyterian pastor. Deconstructing from Christianity has been difficult enough, but now I realize that I've never properly deconstructed from 2 decades of neopaganism and New Age stuff that immediately preceded my reconversion to Christianity some 13 years ago. Perhaps it's my jam to move from spiritual bypassing to spiritual bypassing. Okay, so that is the preface. I'm actually going to stop and keep this as a discrete part, and then I'm going to come live right away again, and I'm going to check the sound, do a sound check on what I just recorded. So this was part one to this drop that I'm giving today called Confessions After Listening to the Conspirituality podcast.